Welcome, everybody, to AI for the Average Joe, Season 4, Episode 3. Isn't things moving quickly? Doesn't time fly? Every time we have a new guest on Average Joe, they bring something very different. And that response is to the pace of change that we're seeing in regards to technology, but also the different ways that people are partnering with artificial intelligence. And we've had some really interesting takes. Last time we had Michelle Parry Slater talking about values and AI and what does that mean to Michelle and how does she use AI in her role. And today we're going to be interviewing Zoe Walters, who again has a very, very different take on partnering with artificial intelligence. And I think you're going to find today super, super interesting. So, Zoe, how are you?
I'm really good. Super happy to be here. Lovely to be with you. So thanks for the invite. I feel very
Oh,
privileged.
you're more than welcome, and it was great to be on your podcast a couple of months ago as well. So it's like a bit of a homecoming having you with us. So thanks for making the time. So Zoe, we're really interested in regards to you work in an AI build transformation business, you're working with clients, but you're also doing a PhD on AI and something very unusual in regards to a partnership, which perhaps many people wouldn't have come across before. So in today's episode, we'd love to learn more about what you're doing in that space, what you're doing at Empowered AI, and feel free to share what you feel comfortable with in regards to your area of expertise. So tell us about what you're up to.
Fabulous. Well, yes, there's probably a bit of a backstory, which is very quickly for people that know me, they know that I've been in HR for quite some years. And in my course of HR, I've accumulated a few skills along the way that kind of sit with people. So example would be I become a certified coach because I thought it might help me to, know navigate conversations more successfully. I became a psychologist to understand more about myself and other people and myself in relation to other people, because it would help me then understand what learning development might need to look like. I've always been ferocious about learning, so I've always added to my skills. And over that period of time, I've also, because of that, it's probably stretched me out my comfort zone to think about what projects can I work on. And that's led me to work on really, really big projects, namely two that have really informed my sort of career, if you like. One of them was with Adidas. I helped them build their entire digital function. No, we didn't call it AI back then, but that was still the thing that was kind of the undercurrent, and it was still very new technology. But that's where kind of I was first introduced. And then more recently, my last corporate role at Condé Nast as interim CPO, I worked all their print to digital again. So thinking about digitalization, there was aspects of AI that stood within that project as well. So these two really big beasts of projects. I guess I've been quite close to technology and what that is bringing for those industries and sectors and those companies. So, but in all that, I realised the change piece for me is the most interesting part. So the adoption, how do we learn? How do we trust? How do we move along with the journey? You and I know that we're all shades of all colours. It's not a flick of the switch and off we go. It's more around being able to connect dots, bridge gaps, and take people on a journey. So that led me in the pandemic to a very, very specific thing, which was I really understand psychology very well as a psychologist. What I don't understand is why we do the things we do and why we think the way we think. Cognitive neuroscience and cognition will tell us certain things about perception and sensation, but it doesn't also talk about the metaphysical. So that was my little rabbit hole I went down of personal psychology. And what that means is spiritual psychology in a nutshell. And lots of people are going to go, "Ooh, that word is a bit frightening." Spiritual psychology is more around a faith that there is something bigger than yourself. Now, you may call that, some people relate to that as religious, some people relate to that as universe, some people relate to that in multiple different ways, but essentially that is to transcend beyond one's ego. Transpersonal is about, Maslow talks about this hierarchy of needs, talks about self, transcendence, actualization. That's what I mean by that. So I'll stop there for a second because I'm probably going to go down more of a rabbit hole in a minute, but that's where my curiosity is really heading. And why? Because we're in this era of AI and technology enhancement, advancement, acceleration. We're on an innovation curve, which is going to be much shorter than the agricultural and the industrial revolution
Mm,
curves. And we're moving very quickly, but the human isn't. The human spirit is something which is so unique and individual, and you can separate a spirit from a third dimension body. We talk about spirit, that's something that's actually not tangible. You can't really
yeah.
it's maybe some people might relate to it as personality or energy, but you can feel someone's energy, right? Normal psychology doesn't can't explain that. So these two worlds of like where we're going with the technology and the human spirit, where's the intersectionality of these two things? Because AI has the ability to, lots of people will say, oh, it doesn't sound like me, it doesn't think like it doesn't feel like me. Well, that can be trained to a degree, but my question is, can we really train human spirit? I'm not sure. So when I think about the future of work and HR and what they need to prepare for, because there is such emergence that something new needs to come forward, we need to lead very differently. And how is HR going to do that? I'm not sure, but that's where my PhD, I hope to be able to answer that specific question
Wow.
in the
No
few years.
pressure.
No pressure. I'm like, no pressure at all. Like, I mean, my God, what have I done? But I love
That's a hell of a question to ask, Zoe.
it's and I'm probably going to have to, obviously, over time, I'm going to have to really drill that down and get very specific about what thing I'm bringing to market. But hopefully, in a few years from now, I'll be able to stand on stages with you, Erica, and talk about this specific thing that's kind of
Yes.
like being able to inform us, to help us with direction, because nobody can figure this out right now. So let me be the first. I want to figure it out. So I'm going there. And yeah.
Wow. Zoe, what's the question that you want answering? Because there's obviously this sort of intersection that you're describing, but what's the overarching question? Does that make sense? What is it we're
Absolutely
trying
it
to
does.
get to with that? Because
Yeah.
it feels for me a bit conceptual, because I'm kind of
Yep.
like, well, there's this idea of who we are beyond what we learn and what we say and how we communicate and all that stuff. But
Yes.
what's the question we're trying to answer? How does knowing that intersection give us, this way of moving forward and this way of evolving?
Completely. So I think the overarching question, which I need to get a little bit more finessed over the next year, will be, what is the future of work? What does it need to look like? What are we building for? Because if you think about education as it stands now, we got 770,000 grads out of work. So what does the workforce need to look like for Gen Z and Alpha as well? Because they're the ones coming into the workplace. So what do we need to prepare? What does the future of work really look like? So that's the kind of main overarching question that I'm curious to find my way to, because every single CPO I speak to or HR leader, they're grappling to understand, what are we preparing for, knowing that change takes, corporate change, systemic change is something that takes a lot longer than, you're talking a cargo ship that needs to be moved very slowly and carefully, not a speedboat that can turn very quickly. So what does that need to look like in terms of organizations? Yeah, that's the big
And
question.
the spiritual piece, Zoe, is that like, how does that tap into who we really are above our corporeal self? Or like, because you can argue, people, I'm sure, defined soul or spirit or energy or, whatever that is in lots of different ways. And you could argue, like, from a physics perspective, energy isn't created or destroyed. It just changes from one mean to another, really. So a lot of people describe the spirit that way in regards to,
Yep.
upon death, there is energy there that transcends into something else. So how does that tie into the future of work and AI and that kind of stuff?
So I think so. It's a really great question. So I think that if we kind of distill it into three different areas, we've got kind of leadership of right now, which is Gen X and Y predominantly, which are non-digital natives. You've got then Gen Z and Alpha on the other side, which are going to be coming into the organisation. They're in the organisation. Alpha will be in the organisation. Now, one can argue that this is not necessarily about generations, but it is about behaviours within those generations. But they are wildly different, and they need to. These two particularly have tension. These two, I'll put them in two different domains: digital natives, non-digital natives. And so I think that what we're seeing is very traditional ways of leading. And a generation that's not very receptive to that. They have something very different that they need. Gen X and Y would see Gen Z and Alpha as very entitled, very socially awkward, social anxiety, lots of different things. I'm from a generation which is get done, whereas that's not the case for those younger generations. So how we lead is predominantly the question here. The added complexity is that we've got technology in the biggest part of that, which is changing how people are responding. So we talk about trigger points. People are being triggered. They're being, got lots of things happening in our external world, which are push and pulling on us. So triggering can be negative, it can be positive, it's a reaction of some kind. So going back to the self, if I know who I am, I know what triggers me, what delights me, what switches me on and off, then I've got a much better chance of leading other people from a place of insecure, not lack of insecure. So I'm secure in my body, I'm secure about who I am and what I know, and therefore I'm much more able to cope with what people are bringing to me because I'm not as responsive to it. I'm not as triggered by it. So it's kind of like that self-mastery aspect of leadership, if you like. And being able to lead through that, knowing what those other people or individuals and company or teams need. Some used to call it servant leadership, which never kind of really got off the ground because it has such a negative connotation.
The NHS did a lot around that, I think, didn't they? Yeah,
they did. And it kind of went into some kind of morphed into some kind of not negative leadership. It's not really a style, it's an approach and one that you can look at that would sit in my world when I talk about sort of leadership is that's what I mean, more of those qualities that come about through being a servant leader. Doesn't mean that we're a servant, but that's the triggering part for a lot of people.
Just listening to you, Zoe, I've got all the feels over here because this is playing in massively to my be it my parenting style and me being a parent, actually having children that are in that Gen Alpha, I'm guessing, young like primary school children.
Yeah.
And I think when you're a parent to those children that are going to be those exact people that you're describing and coming into the workforce with very different approach, they've been treated very differently. I think there's so much fear at the moment around technology that's kind of put on to parents bringing children up in this generation, but you can't avoid it. There's a sadness that surrounds the fact that they're not learning in the same way, that they're not responding in the same way, that they're not outside. I think there's some stats around like the NHS, I think, don't quote me on this, but is like 90 something % down on broken bones with children and like 70 something % up on mental health crisis and all that stuff. That is all going to play into this, right, as they get into the workforce. Yeah. And there's also so much education now around parenting in a way that's more gentle and kinder. And I wonder if some of that is now feeding into this leadership style, because if they've been parented in what feels like a more gentle way, for not as a technical term, but in a way that's less authoritative from parents and more kind of inclusive, then those behaviours are going to be expected, aren't they, as they enter the workforce? So there's so much that I can see happening now from that perspective that's just really leaning on some of the stuff that you're saying.
I mean, I think every parent's job is the hardest job in the world. I'm not a parent. I mean, I'm exposed to children through my family and my friends. But what I see is that we have, if you look at mental health statistics from the World Health Organization, Mind, the UK charity, and ONS, Office National Statistics, and NHS, it paints a really dire picture. It's not great. And it tells us that we're in a crisis of mental health, that we've got loneliness as the biggest epidemic in those statistics, followed by PTSD, burnout, workplace uncertainty, burnout. All of these things play a role into kind of what is the role of HR and what should they be doing, because they're not psychologists, they're not NHS people, they're not people that are equipped to deal with the mental health demands that perhaps one should have in an organisation. If you think about it, we spend a third of our lives in work. And we spend most of our days in work. So to me, there is a responsibility of an employer, not necessarily HR, but of an employer, to have a workplace that is kind, empathetic, and sympathetic, that can understand, because we don't work just in a workplace anymore. We're from our home, and our home and our we are one person at work, home. The life is so blurred. It's not easy to say, when you're at work, you leave everything else behind. That's my generation. That's Gen X. That's not the same for, there's got to be you said the word inclusive, Hayley, which I love. But that also has a connotation that it's inclusive as what you deem that to be inclusive.
Yeah.
And I think that what we need to be really aware of is that not one shoe fits all, not one size is for all. And how do we make, diversity, equity, and inclusion has come under radical scrutiny of late. I believe that if you can make a workplace which invites all, has open forum for voices, that you have to not manage people, but communicate and engage with them, allow them to be seen and heard in all that they are. And sometimes that is very difficult, because there are leaders that don't want to hear certain things, or they're taught, there's a subordination in hierarchy, which is very typical in some organizations. So we're coming into this world where we need to take, I believe, take my legal hat off for a second, because HR comes with some legal remit. If I take that off, we just need to be human to human. What's happening in your world? Let me try to understand you and see how I can help you. Bearing in mind that it's not my responsibility to make anyone feel okay or all right. But as a human, I'd like to think, what can I do to enhance you, to help you, or at least point you in the direction where you're going to get help. And I talk about help because I'm painting it as a picture that everyone needs help. We all need help at different moments. We might not need it all the time. But yeah, the workplace is a really complicated place now. Where is it? Who is it? What's in it?
It's not just about the task anymore, because also even taking out some of the things we're talking about in terms of how people's attitudes and behaviors will evolve and change over time as the workforce shifts. You've also got this now where having all the knowledge is no longer going to necessarily equal success in the workplace. Holding on to that piece of content or that process and is no longer going to necessarily keep you in the workplace, because all of that now is again where the technology comes in. So I think it's not so much what are the jobs going to look like, but it's what does the workforce need? What are the skills? What are the behaviors? What do they need to do to really thrive? And I think you're right. Some of it comes back to basics, because what you're talking about then, Zoe, some of that is just around self-awareness, being compassionate, being empathetic. That's the stuff we've been trying to drive in organizations for years, but it's always been labeled as soft skills. And I can't help but think that this is now becoming the hard stuff. This is the stuff that's really going to change the success of people in the workforce.
Absolutely. And I have a massive prediction that so we're very, very consumed by Claude Code and should we forget ChatGPT and all of that malarkey? We've got to recognize that we're in a race. Well, Anthropic, Google, OpenAI will all, respond to the conditions that are placed upon us. They'll all play a game, because that is the way of the world. That's the way that it's gonna go. So those aside, I think that we're going to continually be in a place where AI is thrusted in our faces until it isn't, until it's fully adopted, until it's kind of like a working norm, which I'm not sure it's probably a few years, but not too distant. After that, we're going to be soft skills. So now it's going to be Gen Z they can't. So if we think about sales psychology, which is humans buy from humans, you buy on an emotion, essentially. That's what marketing have done for years. We're going to be skill shortage. You'll be skills people, tradespeople. So your plumbers, your electricians, your hairdressers. There might be bots that can cut hair, but I'm not sure I'd trust a bot to cut my hair. But anyway, sort of real skills trades for people using their hands. So I think of like hands and being able to do that. The next thing is then sales. I think that people buy from people, and so if we've got poor social skills, how companies is going to have to radically change how we sell products and services. So that's going to become behind the AI noise. There'll be now this, and it expose this. And I believe that leadership will also need to take an overhaul, which is you're going to see more people going on self-mastery retreats. Go and learn about yourself. Go off and learn about you. Get secure. Go and face your demons. Come back a better person, and then you'll be a better parent, leader, friend, daughter, son, whatever it might be. You know. So I feel like there's going to be some few things behind AI that's we're just very distracted with that right now, which keeps us in a job. Thank God. But you know, it's not going to be forever. It's going to be normal adoption, and then we'll be on to the next thing.
I think you're absolutely right. And I've just had a bit of a light bulb moment listening to you both there in regards to, AI is already and will continue to have people question, who am I? What's my power? What's my value? I've been I don't know, university lecturer for 35 years, and now I find out that my power and my knowledge is no longer valid because my students therefore go to Claude, for example, and teach themselves. They create the lesson plans and actually know more about the subject technically than I could. So then I'm in that kind of space of, well, who am I as a person, and what does that actually mean? And the closest thing I can connect to that is when you're made redundant and you've put everything into a job, for example, and suddenly the rug's pulled from out of you and you question your purpose as a human if you're that invested. And I know people who would perhaps profess to be perhaps more spiritual are on that space of having a framework to support their questions around that. You can almost see that whether we wrap it up as self-awareness or well-being or support or leadership or whatever else, there's going to be this fundamental gap in people's understanding of self because of the change that AI is going to bring. And I think upskilling and support will answer some of those questions. But if you go right into the middle of the onion, if people's identity is closely associated with their job, for example, and they struggle with change, there's a big place for spirituality. I can't even say the word spirituality, religion. I'm not religious. I'm very agnostic, but I do believe there's something somewhere that the energy taps into in some way. There is a bigger presence, there's definitely a piece to play there in regards to identity, I think, with this stuff. So it's an interesting conversation.
Isn't it? The self, you've said it. And I'm smiling away because I get the fuzzies when I talk about these things. And the body is a GPS, right? So we've got the human, I call
the
it
body keeps score, they say, right?
The body keeps score, right? Absolutely. This is just an earth suit. So I believe that this is our suit that we get to wear in this human life, because we've got environment, we've got weather, we've got conditions that we need to exist within. So this is the kind of like body that we have to have in order to move around this kind of world, but on a very kind of more fifth, sixth, seventh dimension, which some people might go, I have no idea what you're talking about, and that's fine. In other dimensions, this is not the reality. This is a human 3D reality. So the human spirit would transcend beyond these different dimensions and continue to learn through those different dimensions. So when you're born into this life, you're born into a 3D world. There is what we call Akashic records. It's like a filing cabinet of your past memories, all of that kind of, you don't lose it. It's stored, and not in the lobes and the portals of kind of the cognition of our brain. This is kind of soul archives.
Yeah.
So when we can tap into those, when we can first accept that there is something that's far beyond these years that we've been in this human world. Mine's 51, but maybe I'm thousands of years old. I don't know. But I've done work to be able to go back into that, be able to go into my archives, my soul archives, and be able to extract information of why am I really here. I mean, that is for some people very far-fetched. I choose to have a very scientific view about it, because if you look at psychedelics and why people have psychedelic therapy, or at least, I mean, some people take it for recreation. I've taken it to be able to access those different archives, that information, that knowledge. To me, we are the most intelligent of species, and artificial intelligence will never ever supersede the human. When I think about what I've just said in terms of that archive, that knowledge and wisdom from different dimensions, from different places and spaces, maybe across galaxies. I don't know. I don't know all the
Well, Zoe,
answers.
we only use what 15% of our brain now, right? So
Right,
who's to say that
Um,
the other 80% isn't tapped into this stuff? We know,
right.
hundreds of thousands of people talk about previous lives and hypnotherapy, and
Yes,
I think having an open mind, whether you are cynical to it or believe it or positive, embrace it or whatever, I think just understanding it is key,
yeah.
right? So,
Yeah,
mm,
it's a pretty big topic, and sometimes there's a thing that I sometimes ask myself, which is who am I when I think I'm being myself?
yeah.
Because I'm not sure who the self is sometimes. So if you're with your children or child, Hayley, you're
mm,
mummy, or you're with your friends, you're Hayley, at work,
mm,
you're Hayley. Like there's different dimensions of us as well
mm,
within this kind of like human life. We're not
yeah.
one person all the time. So who am I is a really complex question, and why am I here? I'm very clear that my purpose is to educate, my purpose is to teach. And we're all here. And again, the identity thing, I think you said something really profound around identity being wrapped in your job. Many people do that: paycheck, the title,
My
status.
first redundancy, I thought it was the end of the world,
Yeah,
because all I knew and I was invested in was that job and that career. And then
yeah,
suddenly overnight
yeah.
gone.
Absolutely. And I think that that's where if we can detach ourselves from anything, so no thing external
Hmm.
to us, that we can
Mm.
self-approve, self-validate, give permission all within, and not look for any external, then we detach from what we typically will see as that attachment that drives who we are and what we do. If we can do that, which is a self-mastery, that's achieved through things like meta states of altered consciousness and meditation, mindfulness. And lots of people can say, oh, I can't meditate, I don't do. You're doing it all the time. If you're on a treadmill and you're doing some kind of running, or that is a meditative state, you could argue. When you're eating and you're enjoying the food, that's kind of almost like a certain state of being. So it's such a complex thing, but
Mm.
awareness is, you've got to go down rabbit holes to, number one, be curious about it. No one can really teach you about you. This is a path that only you, and exclusively you, uniquely you, can do it. And
Hmm.
yes, there's people out there that can help point you in the direction, but that question of who am I is one that, it's been 15 years, and I was living in New York next to a Buddhist center, heard them chanting, and I was like, somewhere in my body was saying, I want to do that.
Yeah.
I'm in a crazy world. I'm in doing I'm also at university part-time, working full-time. I'm deranged. It's New York. It's on steroids. It was a great time of life, but it was also one of the most hardest, because of the environment I was in. And then I started chanting, and never looked back. Now that's taken on very different forms, and all sorts of things along the way, which has led me to do a master's in transpersonal psychology. It's led me to do a PhD. But I think it's so important that you know who you are, and to be really comfortable with who you are. And aging is a part of that, without doubt. I'm in my 50s, and I didn't feel this way in 30, because I was a lot more insecure, and I was wrapped around a status and job title, and achieving and being a high potential. That's also, when you do redundancy,
Mm,
crippling.
Hmm.
It is.
yeah.
So that
It's
sense of self.
so it's so interesting because I know we're sort of running out of time a little bit, but it's so interesting listening to you, Zoe. I was made redundant as well, but I actually felt quite liberated.
Mm,
Um, I actually felt, although it was kind of strange that I'm shutting down this machine that had what I'd been doing for years just on it that no longer mattered the next
yeah,
day. That was bizarre. I turned it off and thought, well, none of that matters anymore. I'm not even going to be able to get into that again. And I'd been doing it. So there's that. But it's the liberation of I've got absolutely nothing to lose now. So I can do something completely different because I
yeah,
think sometimes that identity you can get quite trapped by the sort of perception of your identity.
yeah,
Absolutely.
But I don't want to go down another rabbit hole with that now. But
That's
it's
another
just, yeah.
conversation.
yeah,
But it's just really interesting. Listen, I think it just goes to show that when you say the word spirituality, like you've said a few times, Zoe, people will have different connotations and what that means for them, and they might switch off and go, well, I don't believe in that. But I think if you can identify with what piece of that makes sense to you or your experiences, it helps to just look at things in a different way.
Mm.
Um, And that's been a really interesting takeaway, Zoe. Thank you for that. And I love your connection between that and also your knowledge around the tech and the AI use, and the clarity that you bring around what the purpose of those two different things are and the separation it brings, but where they're going to cross over in the future, and your curiosity around that. So it's been really interesting listening to you. Thank you.
Thank
You're
you, Zoe,
welcome.
so much.
You're absolutely welcome. Thank you.
And a great kind of, I've started, my brain's gone crazy thinking about all this stuff in regards to, we talk about organizations getting ready for AI and AI enablement, AI training, AI literacy, but that is literally just the smallest slither on the cake in regards to the human condition and human experience in change. And, if you're not doing at least hearts and minds, skills, support, mindset for people, let alone what we've been talking about today in regards to what is my internal self and framework to help me get through the next couple of years when it comes to tech and change and AI, that in itself is almost kind of on the roadmap now as well. So thank you, because my grey matter's gone a bit crazy thinking about all
I'm
this
like,
stuff
we've
as
not
well.
even talked about like multi-generational working. I've not heard anyone talk about this.
Yeah.
What does that mean for people?
Yeah.
We talk about equality and age is just a number, but we don't talk about actually working across generations and what that's really, and the evolution that that's bringing now into the workplace. Fascinating, but hey ho,
So
we
we'll have
don't
to
want to.
get you back to
We'll
talk
take,
more
yeah,
about
we'll
that.
take it
So
offline.
anytime. And I will say that for anyone listening, there is a framework that's so under, I think it's undershared, which is called the oh my gosh, it's just absolutely escaped my brain, but I'm gonna tell you about it after. But it is their goals, and they've got a framework. They're a non-for-profit organization, and they have, it looks like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it's a really great framework. And I couple that with Otto Scharmer's Theory U, which is a co-presencing, co-initiating, co-creating change model. And I think that these two things, so change models, archaic, Lewin, get them out. Like,
Yeah.
look at a different prospect. But anyway, I shall share those with you, because if anyone
Please, we'll put
wants
a
to go
link to it
down,
on the
if
on the
people want to go
episode.
down a rabbit
Yeah.
hole and look at their own, it might be helpful.
Zoe, if people want to learn more, and I'm convinced there will be a bunch of people that will want to learn more about this or are interested in regards to your support at Empowered AI around AI transformation and the consultancy that you offer, how do they get in contact with you?
You can just drop me a line on LinkedIn or Zoe at ZoeWalters.com. I have two emails, but if people know my name, then it's very easy, Zoe at ZoeWalters.com. But I'd love to have a conversation. So even if it's research based, I'm always open to having electric conversations. Energy is just beautiful when it's exchanged in a really reciprocal way. Give and
Yes.
take.
Yeah. Brilliant. Fantastic.
Thank
So
you.
thank you so much for
Thank you.
today. A fantastic conversation. My favorite story is Alice in Wonderland, and I feel like we've absolutely gone down the rabbit hole with Alice today. So thank you very much. Appreciate that. And
Thank
thank
you
you.
both. Really good.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, Zoe.
And
See
thanks to
you.
everybody that's watched today's episode. We'll see you on the next episode of Average Joe. Thanks very much.